So at this point, what you would have is pretty close to done part. We still have to do the end back here. You'd either take it to a bandsaw and cut this off a little bit longer, or you could set it up in a lathe and churn it with a parting tool to get them all to approximately the same length. Doesn't matter really which way step 3 would be done. But now we're going on to step 4. And in step 4, we're going to be cutting this top side. So this is what we have here. What I'm going to show you is the next, what we need to get to. So if I look at this, I think I have it open right here. If we look at this part, this is what we want to get to. So we need to add on here what our stock's going to look like. We're going to make another configuration. We had the churn configuration like this. This is the finished part. And we want to have a configuration that's kind of in between the two. So I'm going to leave this configuration on, and I'm going to add some stuff to it. I really just need to add a boss kind of on the end of this here. So I'm going to go into my dogleg part 4 configurations, and I'm going to right click and say add configuration. And I'm going to call this one finished milling or finish milling. Doesn't really matter what you call it, just as long as you remember. I'll hit OK. And really, it just made a copy of the previous one. So I'd have to go over here to Feature Manager and start suppressing or unsuppressing some parts. So I think if I were to take and make a circle around the outside here, I could get what I wanted. Let's see. I'm going to unsuppress this one. That gives me that lump there. I'm going to go in and I'm going to suppress this and suppress this. Now that gives me what I had actually churned. Pretty close to it. So if I were to suppress cut extrude 4, cut extrude 5, have this one on, I could then add, take a circle here and cut down, or make a circle at this height and add up to wherever my saw marks would be. So I think what I'll do is I'll go to this face here and make a new sketch. So I'll click Sketch, Sketch, and then I'm going to go up here and click this edge, because I want to make that circle. And I'm going to tell it to convert entities. And hit OK. So now I have a sketch right there that I can do something with. If I were to go then to a new feature, and I'm going to do a cut extrude, or extruded cut. And I don't want to cut all that off. I want to cut it off from a certain distance back. And maybe I say it's a 1/4 inch back, wherever you would saw cut to. But I could say instead of the sketch plane, I could tell it that I want to go offset from that plane. And I could offset at 0.250. And I could flip that. So it would go to the other side. So that gets it out, but it's a little bit too far. So I would need to have it stop at this surface. Or I could just tell it here minus 0.250 from that number that we already previously had in there, or 1.11. That's the distance. And I hit OK. And that will cut that end off. So after you were to saw cut this off or put that in a lathe and part them off, this would be kind of the shape you would have that you would use for putting in the mill and machining this top down. So at this point, you would resave this. So I'd go in here and save. And now my part has 3 configurations. It has the configuration we just made here, the finished configuration, and a churn configuration, which we used earlier. We're going to go to the finished configuration, and we're going to use that as our starting point for our milling here. I'm going to go over to Delcam for SolidWorks and machine a part. Current document, yes. MC inch mill, open. And it brings it in, and we're going to have to get this all aligned again. So the stock axis, if I rotate this, I could just pick this face. That would get me my Z correct here. The X I want to go along this way, but we'll worry about that in the setup. So I'm going to say next here. My stock type is going to be a solid body. And I'm going to open up part 4 again, right here. But this time I'm going to use the configuration of finished milling, the one we just made. I'm going to say open. And you'll see it brings that in as our stock that we're going to utilize. Material, I'll go in here, I'll change this again to stainless, and I'll hit OK. Then I can accept this. So you'll see that it has some stock that we can kind of utilize for machining on this part. It's now asking us for a new setup, and you'll see it's way down here, totally in the wrong spot. But I do know that from here to here is a 1/4 inch. So I'm going to pick up here, I'm going to say create, I'm going to say a center point of this, and I want my Z to align to that as well. And that gets me kind of on the center of that. And then my offset on the Z would be -0.250. Because really I want my 0, 0 to be where the top of the part would be. I don't really know, when I saw cut that, I don't really know where it would be. But I could end up touching off of a parallel or something down here. So if I put this in a vise like so, my jaws would pinch between here and here. And I could ride this up on a parallel right here. And if I measured from here to here and set that as my Z0, that would work out pretty well. Alright, so I'm going to say OK. Alright, so my part is set up and ready to machine. So I'm first going to face this off. I'm not exactly sure what tool you'd end up using. I'll probably try to use like a 1-inch roughing type tool. And then I'll use that same 1-inch roughing tool to just kind of feed in across here and get it close to this edge. So I'm going to end up creating a line to do a groove toolpath with. And then this edge right here I'll use with like maybe a 1/2 inch 4-flute end mill for finishing that. And then I'll spot drill and drill this hole. So let's start this out. We're going to do a new feature. And here I'm going to do a face. And I'll hit OK. My face will be off of this face right here. Now it doesn't really matter just as long as it's on this level. I could have picked the underneath portion here, but I'll tell it this face, and I want my boundary to be the stock boundary. So I want to look at the stock and use that as a boundary. My thickness, I'm going to pick the top of my stock here. So it knows that it needs to machine off this 1/4 inch. And then I'm going to hit OK. If I go over to my Del Cam, I'll be able to see a new feature. Actually, not a new feature. What we'll do is we're going to look here in the face. We'll see face 1 does just the finish. So I want to change that to rough and finish. So I'm going to double click face 1. And in here I'm going to see finish yes, rough no. I'm going to double click this to yes. And what it's going to do is kind of zig back and forth in increments, and then it's going to finish it off. So I'll say OK here. I want to look in the rough pass and see what tool it's using. It's using a 1-inch face mill. Well, we could use a 1-inch face mill. It'd probably work. We have some, so we'll leave it at that. The feeds and speeds are probably okay. You'd have to check that out. But I do want to change the Z increment to 0.125. Take a little bit lighter steps and hit OK. Now I can play this and skims that off. Again, it went a little fast, but if I were to play this, you'll see it roughs it off first, and then it comes down and does the last little bit to kind of get a little nicer finish on this top edge. Now what I'm going to do is just make some new geometry so that I can come in here and just do a linear move in to this, just to kind of rough it off a little bit. I know from here to here is like 580, I think, or something like that. But I have a 1-inch tool already in the spindle. So if I went from here to here over 500 thousandths, I'd have a little bit of a cleanup pass I could take. So on this face, I'm going to create a sketch. I'm going to create a line from my origin. And I'm just going to come out this way a ways. Just whatever, it doesn't really matter what distance. Just as long as my tool plunges off my part. But I could always go in here and smart dimension maybe from here to here and make this approximately 0.6. If I have a 1-inch tool, that would then plunge off the part. And I'll hit OK. And accept this sketch. So I just have a line here. Now I'm going to do a new feature. So I go back to Delcam, new feature. And we're going to do a groove. So I have my groove feature here. I hit OK. My boundary then is going to be this line. And we're going to do some things with the width and whatever. But first off, we're going to tell it a width of 1 inch because that's the tool we're going to have. And a depth of 150. Now it looks like it's going too deep into our part. But we need to give it some sort of depth. So the top then, I can choose this right here. And this is 150 tall. You'll see this little arrow here telling it's going to come this way. Well, I want it to go that way, so I choose that. And you see that'll rough this off pretty nice. It'll plunge out here, move across, stop right there, and then we'll just finish that up with like a 1/2 inch end mill. I'll hit OK. So now my groove does the slot there. I kind of want to look at what tools I have going here, so I'm going to go to Results. See, I'm using a 1-inch face mill, and then I'm using a 1-inch end mill. And I could probably use the 1-inch end mill for all of it, because we have a nice shell carbide 3-fluter we could use. So I'm going to go into this initial one and change my rough here and change the tool. If I change this from face to end mill, say recent, I have my 1-inch, I hit OK, and then I will hit OK. Now I have 2 of the 3 the same. The face mill is still for the finish, so I'm just going to click the first one, shift click down to the last one, right click, and I'm going to say override tool with the 1-inch. And I'll all be that tool. I'll say OK. So now they all use the 1-inch tool. I could probably actually even finish that with that 1-inch tool. It's a nice tool, so I think we'll do that. So I'll go back to the model. I'm going to have it finish this off. So if I went in here to a new feature, side, and hit OK, I could tell it, I don't have a curve there, but I could tell it to select edges, use this plane as a reference, this edge as a boundary. My bottom it already knows because it's here, but my top will be up here. And you'll see it's pointing in here, so that should be fine. And I'll hit OK. And my side is roughing and finishing. I could probably just tell it to finish, and I just want to check and see what that tool is. So I would double click it, and you'll see sure enough I grab that 1-inch end mill. And so first tool will come in, skim across the top a couple times, finish that off. Then that tool is going to come over here, and you'll see it'll plunge off the part, feed in a couple times. It's leaving some material there, so the next tool is going to come, same tool, but come down and come in and finish that off. All that with a carbide shell mill. So I think that'll work pretty nice. I'm going to stop it. Feeds and speeds aren't correct yet. You'll see that they're set up now for a non-carbide. So I'd really have to go in and change it in the first tool. You'll see it's only doing 260 some. So I'm going to go in here and double click this, and under feeds and speeds use a surface footage. So I have 70 for my regular times. We'll just be a little conservative and say, oh, won't let me do that. Won't let me? Nope. So I'm going to have to actually figure it out. So what we could say 140, we could say 200 and let's just say 250. That'll probably be good. And then you'll see our feed rate goes up, and I'll hit OK. Accept it. So it overrides it, and then I could take all of these, and I could, since it's all using the same tool, I could override my RPM. Yes. And then I could also override my feed rate. Yes. So now it's going to use the same feeds and speeds on that tool. Go back to my model. Now the last thing I have is this hole. And I really just want to spot it and then maybe plunge an end mill or a drill in here. It's really up to you how you do it. But I'll do a new feature. Hole. Hit OK. Plain hole. My diameter is this. My bottom, it doesn't really need because it already knows. This is really for a spring to sit into, so it's not a huge deal. I'm just going to hit OK. I'll see it spot drills it and drills it. So now I could come in here and I could simulate first tool, roughs it, finishes it, single steps in here, spots it, comes in with the drill, and it drills it. And we have a completed part here. So at this point you would simulate it, or you would post it, and go run it. Again, the way I would run this is pinch this between the vice jaws, run a parallel underneath it here because you have a flat, and then you could figure out the distance from here to up here, and that would be, you could find that information on the print. So that's it for this. This would complete this part. I did notice that at the end of this, my x-axis is rotated incorrectly, so I need to rotate it 90 degrees. To do that, I would just go under Setup, and I could go to Edit, and just rotate one time on the X. If you wanted it the other way, you could as well, and rotate it around. And you get it OK. Everything would update, and then you simulate, and now it would be aligned around the X. So not a big issue, but you definitely want that fixed before you'd run this. That's it.